Hey, how you doing? I'm Steve. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to talk about a guitar player who burst on the scene in the 80s and one of the biggest bands in the world. They were known for their legendary antics and were often referred to as the most dangerous band in the world. Of course, we're talking about Motley Crue, and today we're going to talk about their original guitar player, Mick Mars. I got a suggestion from Cam_CO8, and I want to thank him for that because that gave me the idea for today's video. So who is Mick Mars? Well, Mick was born Robert Allen Deal in Terre Haute, Indiana on May 4th, 1951. Not 1954 as some people report. His parents were Frank Deal, that was his dad. He was a factory foreman and then later became a Baptist minister, and his mother was Tina Deal. He had an older brother named Frank Jr. and a younger sister named Susan. Now, not long after Mick being born, they relocated to Huntington, Indiana. While researching Mick, I found that he seemed to be a pretty private guy, and there's not a lot to be found about his early years. I found a book called Motley Rock Stories, written by Jack Valentine. He was the drummer for a band called Whitehorse that Mick played in before Motley Cru. Most of the info I found about Mick's youth I'm getting from this book, and now Jack does say in the book that he and Mick pretty much are no longer friends. This was back in 2006 when he wrote it. And some of the info could be contested, but I did stick with what I could verify based on other things I read and other videos I found. I did find a video that Jack made with Mick sometime in 1984, which corroborates some of this. And so I think it's pretty good. Now, incidentally, Jack Valentine, he says he invented the upside down drums. And there's some photos I'm going to show you. And the contraption he invented looks a little scary, but he did do it before Tommy, and he says that he's flattered that Tommy copied him. Take that for what it's worth. Mick's family moved around quite a bit when he was young, trying to find work and everything. And according to Jack, his little sister wasn't very well. So the doctors had recommended the family would move to a warmer climate. Frank packed the family up, made their move cross country, and they ended up in Garden Grove, California. This was around when Mick was 9 years old. When he was 3 years old, he saw a country musician named Skeeter Bond perform at the county fair. Now, Skeeter wore an orange outfit with sequins and a large Stetson hat, played guitar and sang. Mick loved him, and he told his mom, "That's what I want to do with my life." And his mom, being supportive, took him, and they got his hair cut like Elvis. According to Mick, no one in his family was musically inclined. His dad had always wanted to play guitar, but didn't have the patience for it. And honestly, he was trying to take care of a family of 5. They had a meager income. He just didn't have the time for it. Mick did have a great uncle who was a violin teacher in Huntington, Indiana. And Mick says that one day he was coming home and he was hit by a train. Now, he doesn't remember the specifics. His grandma had told him about it, but he just doesn't remember. He really liked monster movies when he was a kid, like The Creature from the Black Lagoon, The Wolf Man, Frankenstein, stuff like that. He says back then monsters were really cool. Now, I think that's probably where he got some of the ideas for the makeup he wore when he was with Motley Crue. Now, his first guitar was just a toy. His parents bought him a Mickey Mouse guitar that you wound up and it played Mickey songs. He played around with it, figured out how to tune the strings so he could play melodies on it. After this, he says he thinks he got an old acoustic. He can't remember. And then at one point he had an old K electric guitar. That's something that you would have got at a department store like Sears, or if you remember, Montgomery Ward. Now, when Mick was around 12 or 13, he says his Aunt Annie, however you want to say that, Aunt Annie. Anyway, she gave him a Les Paul that she bought brand new for $98. Think about that, $98. He says he wishes he still had the guitar. Imagine what it'd be worth now. No kidding. Anyway, Jack says the following year, a friend gave him a 54 Fender Strat. That's a nice friend. I know it's hard to believe that a hard rocker like Mick Mars was inspired by country music, but it's the truth. Next, he got into surf music, especially the iconic Dick Dale, whom Mick says he was fortunate enough to become friends with over the years, up until his passing. Now, after that, Mick had discovered the Beatles, and he says that After he saw their movie A Hard Day's Night, he realized that he could make his dream happen, playing music for a living. So he committed himself to it after that. He started learning Beatles songs and he joined his first band called the Jades. That was a Beatles cover band, and he played bass for them. Jack said that his first gig at the American Legion Hall was in Westminster, California, and he made about $5, which he used to buy guitar strings. Now, for inspirations, Mick cites Jimi Hendrix and Ritchie Blackmore, but he really loves Jeff Beck. That was probably his biggest inspiration. Mick's love for the guitar grew, and he practiced all the time. He never took a lesson, and he was entirely self-taught. His first time on stage was a talent show at Warner Junior High in Westminster, California. And Jack Valentine says that Mick met some brothers. Their names were Johnny, Tony, and Paulie Ruiz. And they were in a street gang called the Bosco Brothers. They started a band together, called it The Sound of Soul. Now, apparently Mick went to school with comedian Steve Martin as well. They were class clowns. They joked around all the time. But Mick had a bit of a temper. He was quite opinionated, and I guess he got into a lot of fights. One time he had an assignment in high school to write an essay about his favorite poem. The poem he chose was a song by the band Cream. The teacher failed him. He got suspended after he told the teacher his thoughts about his grade. So not long after that, he got back into school. Another teacher kicked him out of class for writing chord charts in his science book. Mick decided school wasn't worth it. He dropped out to focus on music. Mick's parents got tired of the loud guitars, so Mick moved into the shed behind their house. That was someplace he could play as loud as he wanted to without bothering anyone. Now, the brothers in the gang that he played with, the Bosco gang, the Ruiz brothers, they'd have rival gangs show up at their house all the time trying to pick a fight, and Mick got really tired of that, so he quit the band. Someone told him about a blues band in Fresno, California looking for a guitar player, so he picked up and moved up there to play with them. When he got there, he learned that the band wasn't as far as long as he'd hoped. He wasn't going to be able to support himself from anything they made, at least not for a while. He got a job picking produce, got tired of that real fast, and said, screw it. And he moved back home to his parents, back into the shed. According to Jack, Mick started using speed and a heavy painkiller called Seconal. Plus, he was drinking really heavy. He went to a doctor for a checkup, and the doctor told him if he kept doing that, he was going to die. Apparently, that was enough for him to stop. He quit, and this all happened before he was 19 years old. When he was 19, Mick moved in with some bikers in Orange County, California, and started playing with a band called Watashi. Now, they thought the name Watashi meant number one in Japanese, but it means I, like me, myself, and I. You know, thinking at it in a certain point of view, it does mean number one, huh? Anyway, at a party, Mick met this girl named Sharon. She was 16, so she was about 3 years younger than him. They hit it right off. Not long after they met, they found out Sharon was pregnant. Mick wanted to do the right thing, married her. Now he had a family support, so he got a job at an industrial laundry, and the same place his new wife worked. His favorite guitar is a Les Paul, so much so he named his first son Les Paul. But it wasn't long after that Sharon was pregnant again. This time they had a daughter. They named her Stormy. Now Mick was under so much responsibility. He was feeling so much pressure. He was unhappy that he wasn't making music. He didn't know what to do. From a suggestion from his dad, who was now a Baptist minister, he told him to check out the church for answers. He did, and he formed a gospel band, but he soon learned the church wasn't ready for his style of playing. He was just ahead of his time. 10 years later, Stryper and others became quite successful playing hard rock and heavy metal. He injured his left hand at work, and he panicked. He was afraid that something bad could happen and he might never be able to play guitar again, so he quit the job. While he was healing, Watashi had some gigs. They had to replace him. So now he didn't have a band. He was pretty depressed. He told Sharon, his wife, that he would never work a day job again as long as he lived. So she had to start working multiple jobs to support him. She got frustrated, took the kids, and left. Now Mick's in his 20s. He's broke and homeless, no band. He moved back into the shed at his parents' house. His troubles weren't over yet because he had no money. Couldn't pay child support. Sharon turned him in. The cops arrested him and threw him in jail for it. So after this, he would start using odd aliases to try to avoid the police. One such alias was Zorky Charlemagne. He started having severe back and hip pains, so his aunt took him to see a specialist. This is when he was diagnosed with an extremely rare degenerative bone disease called ankylosing spondylitis. It's a chronic inflammation of the spine and joints. The doctors told him it wouldn't get any worse, but they were wrong. His condition has gotten worse and worse over all the years. According to Jack, Mick had been hanging out at a rock and roll dive bar called Pier 11 in Costa Mesa, California, and that's where he met and befriended the members of a band called Whitehorse. He'd been playing around town in a few bands, working as a security guard at a storage facility, and hating life. He really wanted a full-time music gig. He started working as a roadie for Whitehorse, and he was always broke. According to Jack, he was always upbeat, full of life, and a natural comedian. Jack says he did great impressions of cartoon characters. He was also the only one who wasn't doing drugs and alcohol, although he did smoke like a chimney. Now, per Jack, Whitehorse had at one time used the name Motley Cru. This was before Mick was in the band. But competing clubs in the same town wouldn't let a band play at their club if they played at one of the other clubs. So Motley Crue, adopted the name Whitehorse so they could play a different club in the same town. Well, they got a bigger response from the crowd when they were named Whitehorse, so they just kept it. Now, when Mick was with them, the bass player of Whitehorse came in and made a comment about the band saying, "Isn't this a motley looking crew?" Well, that stuck with Mick. He thought it was a great name. He was going to use it, but he had to find the right band. So he hung on to it. Played around the spelling a little bit, came up with a new spelling, but he was hanging on that till he found the right band. It wasn't long before Mick started playing with Whitehorse, and they traveled extensively, eventually getting signed. He played with them from 76 to 77. Now, the other members and the label wanted the band to go the disco direction because that was really big at the time, and Mick had no interest in that, so he quit the band. While he was with Whitehorse, he had another girlfriend, and at that time, she gave birth to his third child, Eric. He had no money, no band, 3 kids to support. He had tried forming a couple bands with former members of Whitehorse. One was called Video Noir, which released 2 singles, but they never went anywhere. And the other was 10 Wheel Drive, which later became Spiders and Cowboys. Now, fate's wheels started turning here. As the story goes, he was in a liquor store to buy some tequila because the stuff at the bar was too expensive. And the clerk behind the counter, his name was Frank. And he said, "You look like a rock and roller type." Well, they had a brief conversation, and they weren't really getting along. They were kind of disagreeing about stuff, started to argue. Well, Mick was leaving the store, and he said to Frank, "Look, you want to see a real guitar player? Come down the Stone Pony. My band's playing. Check it out. You'll see what a real guitar player looks like." Well, he did go down there, but they never talked again. Now, soon after that, Mick joined a cover band called Vendetta, and they went on tour in Alaska. He had met someone previously who really liked his playing, wanted to invest in his band, but he didn't have one. So once he got back from tour with Vendetta, he placed an ad in the Recycler around April 1980 that read, quote, "Loud, rude, and aggressive guitar player available." He had changed his name to Mick Mars, and he had dyed his hair jet black, going for an edgier look. He got a call from the ad from a guy named Tommy Lee. Now, Tommy invited him to audition for his new band, and when he got there, he met the bass player, Nicky Six. Things went well, and he joined the band. A few weeks later, Nicky was looking at Mick funny, and he recognized him, and he said, "I know you." And he goes, "Were you the guy in that liquor store?" And Mick looked at him and says, "Your name Frank?" And he said, "Yeah, Nicky's real name is Frank." Turned out they had met. They didn't get along. Now, Nicky thinks that's really funny because they didn't like each other at first, but they became good friends. Mick convinced them to lose their other guitar player / singer. Didn't like him, said he didn't fit the band right. And Tommy knew this skinny kid who was playing this band called Rock Candy. His name was Vince Neil, convinced them to go down and check him out. So they went down, checked him out. The girls were all over Vince, and they said, "I think he's the guy." So they asked him to join the band. Took a little bit of effort, but he finally joined the band. Now the band was together. Mick Told them about the name Motley Crue. They loved it. They played around with the spelling a little bit, came up with the umlauts. Motley Crue was born. Nicky worked at a club called the Starwood, and he convinced his manager to let the band play there. So they got to open for YNT. Now, when they started, the crowd started yelling at them, cussing them out, all that kind of crap. And one guy spit on Vince on his white leather pants. Well, Vince got pissed, jumped off the stage, started beating the guy up. Nicky took his bass and smashed some guy on the shoulder. Now, despite all of this, they still did a set of 10 songs, and people were paying attention. Now, Mick says that their first show they played at the Whiskey, that's when he felt they had something special. People were chanting while they were playing, and he thought they were doing terrible because he thought they were chanting boo, boo, boo. He later found out they were chanting Croo, Croo, Croo. It made him feel real good. Now, even though all this stuff was going on, the record execs wouldn't give them time of day. So they recorded their own album. They started their own label called Leather Records. They rented a studio for $60 an hour and finished their album in 3 days. They hunted around, found a distributor willing to distribute their album. It's called Too Fast for Love, and they sold 20,000 copies within 4 months. One night, Elektra Records exec Tom Zutaut caught their show at the Whiskey, and he loved them. He went back to the label and relentlessly started to push them to sign him, even though they kept dragging their feet. He finally talked them into it, and Motley Crue was signed to Elektra Records. The label took their original album, remixed it, and re-released it on August 20th, 1982 worldwide. Now, at this time, I read all the music magazines, including Hit Parader and Cream, all that stuff. I was always checking out for the new and up-and-coming artists, and this is where I had first heard about Van Halen, and it's also where I first read a small blurb about a band called Motley Crue. Something about their picture made me want to check them out. So I went down to Tower Records in Eastport Plaza Mall in Portland, Oregon, the day the album was received. And according to the clerk who handed me the album, I got the first copy that they took out of the box to stock the shelves. Now, whether what he said to me was true or not, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. The band gained popularity quickly and became a driving force in the new genre of the 80s metal. Now, anyone knows that Motley Crue is known for partying pretty hard. And Mick, he tried to stay away from drugs, but he developed a pretty heavy drinking problem. So while the rest were dancing with Mr. Brownstone, he was getting drunk. Now, a big reason for this was probably because of his ailment. The AS was getting worse, and it was affecting his interaction with the fans. He just didn't have the mobility to do it as well as the other guys in the band, and he was determined to keep his ailment hidden. He worked with physical therapists, trying to keep it under control, and he did that as long as he could. Now, Mick remembers one Motley Crue tour in Denver, Colorado. Tommy, wasted, was running up and down the halls naked. Now, this got reported to the desk, who called the cops, and it was reported that a guy with long black hair was running naked up and down the halls. First door they knocked on was Mick's. He's got long, dark hair. They arrested him for it. There's another story that when they were recording 1989's Dr. Feelgood, Mick's amps were so loud you could hear him in the studio next door. The band next door, that was Aerosmith. They were recording their Pump album, and Steven Tyler was working on his vocals at the time. According to Mick, he came out yelling at him, saying, "You got to turn your stuff down, Mick. It's leaking into our vocals." Mick says, "I didn't turn him down, though. I just told him, hey, that's the way I play, loud. So yeah, I'm all over their record, wherever they were doing. Somewhere in the mix, you can hear me. Check it out. Let me know. Can you hear him? Let me know in the comments." In 1990, Mick married Emmy Canyon, one of the Nasty Habit backup singers on the Girls, Girls, Girls tour. The marriage only lasted 3 years due to her stepping out on him. And at the end, Mick was super depressed, and she took a ton of his money. Now, not long after that, he met Robbie Mantooth. She was a documentary filmmaker. He met her while they were on tour. They hit it off really well, and they were together until December of 2004. In 1992, Vince was either fired or quit the band. He was replaced with John Coryabbi, who stayed with the band until 96, at which time Vince came back. The album that Coryabbi was on was called Generation Swine, and it was their only non-platinum album. Mick hates and regrets this album. He says he had a horrible time making it. He would come in with parts. They would tell him they sucked, or they'd tell him he was wrong. He just got a lot of ridicule making it. he says that his confidence took a huge hit, and as a result, even today, going into the studio or playing live, he questions himself. Apparently, this was when Mick's relationship with the band really started to fall apart. According to John, the band treated Mick with a lack of respect, and they said he was just a grumpy old bastard. They wouldn't use his parts. They re-recorded everything with session guitar players. And the subsequent album, New Tattoo, Mick says he wasn't even a part of it, or he had a very small part anyway. Now, Nicky, he says that's not true. Mick had fallen into an opiate addiction, and he just doesn't remember. However, the 2008 Saints of Los Angeles album, Mick didn't play anything on there. They were all done by an uncredited guitarist named DJ Ashba. Now, according to Nicky, this happened because Mick was having a hard time playing his parts. Mick says that's not true. Mick married former model Sharina Schonenberger, whom he met chatting on MySpace in 2007. Now, for you younger kids, MySpace was essentially the predecessor to Facebook. Now, Mick, because of his AS, he was in a lot of pain, and as a result, he did get addicted to opiates. But he says since 2012, he's been clean and sober. The pain's still there, but he plays right through it. On December 31st, 2015, the band completed their farewell tour, and Mick thought they were done. Nicky had been very vocal, saying, quote, "There are people in this band who will refuse to ever do this again, and you're talking to one of them. There is no amount of money that would ever make me do this again because I have such pride in how we're ending it." Well, apparently there was an amount of money that would do that for him, because per Tommy Lee, they were offered their own stadium tour, which he says they had never done. So they came back out with a reunion tour. Now that was supposed to start, got delayed several times, and finally started on June 16th, 2022. They wrapped touring for the year of 2022 in October, and Mick announced his retirement, reportedly because of his AS. This is where hidden troubles started to surface. John Corabi spoke out, saying until he heard it from Mick himself, he didn't believe that he left the band on his own accord, rather that he was being pushed out. Now it sounds like he just might be right. On April 6, 2023, Mick filed a lawsuit against Motley Crue, citing they had withheld business information from him and that they had been trying to unjustly oust him from the band. He said that Nicky had been gaslighting him over his guitar playing for years. He says that when he announced his retirement, the plan was still to be a member of the band. He could play one-off performances or potential residencies. The touring was what was hard on his body, getting on the plane, flying places, riding the bus, all that stuff. But if they had a residency gig where he didn't have to travel around, he could do that. He wanted to be involved in things non-touring related. Per Mick, they offered him a severance package, cutting his share in the band from 25% to 5%. He refused. In the lawsuit, Mick says that, in particular, Nicky had been dogging him on guitar playing, even though the rest of the band had been, quote, playing to tracks for all of the 2022 live shows. Mick says they had tried to get rid of him since '87, but hadn't been able to because he was the guitar player. He came up with the name, helped form the band, and raised the original money to get them started. He says, quote, "I'm pretty upset that they're even pulling this crap. I've carried these bastards for years." Now, according to Bob Daisley, he was the bass player for Ozzy Osbourne in 1984. He walked in on the band having a meeting without Mick, planning on firing Mick and replacing him with Jake E. Lee, who was the current guitar player for Ozzy Osbourne at the time. Bob said he talked him out of it, and it does give some validity to what Mick is saying that the band was trying to do to him. Now, according to Nicky, he says Bob's story is 100% not true, but Tommy says, yeah, it's true. The band, however, says he's way off base. In a statement released, they said that they had an agreement in 2008 essentially saying that if a member resigns, they don't get a share of the live profits. Furthermore, the statement read, quote, "The band did everything to protect him, trying to keep these matters private to honor Mick's legacy and take the high road. Unfortunately, Mick chose to file the lawsuit and to badmouth the band. The band feels empathy for Mick, wishes him well, and hopes that he can get better guidance from advisors who aren't driven by greed." On January 16th, 2024, a California Superior Court judge found in Mick's favor, stating that if he had not filed the lawsuit, the guys in Motley Crue never would have turned over the paperwork that he was asking for. Therefore, he was justified. His requests were not out of the ordinary or burdensome. It should have been something they just would have fulfilled. They also were ordered to pay all his legal fees. Now, Motley says this was a win for them, but it sounds more like it's a win for Mick. I mean, they've got to pay his legal fees. Anyway, Mick's son, Les Paul Deal, he plays and builds guitars and spends quite a bit of time with his dad. His other son, Eric, he's very private about him, hasn't really mentioned anything about it. Eric stays out of the spotlight, and they've never revealed who his mother is. Stormy, his daughter, she's a TikToker, and they have revealed that she has inherited his AS. Mick has 9 grandchildren and at least 1 great-grandchild, although he hasn't revealed the exact number. Mick says he's been financially busted 3 times in his life. Once before Motley Crue, again after his first wife, and the last time with his second wife. They drained his bank accounts and he lost everything. Mick, over his career, has collaborated with several other artists on songs like Pop Evil's Boss's Daughter, great song. Hinder's Take It to the Limit, another great song. And Papa Roach's Into the Light, another great song. He has several guitars, but his favorites are Fender Strats with a humbucker, single coil humbucker layout, if you know what that is. And he likes Floyd Rose tremolos. Mick has a solo album set to release on February 23rd, 2024. It's been a long time coming. Musicians who played on the album are Korn's drummer Ray Luzier, bassist Chris Coyer, vocalist Jacob Bunton. He sang and also co-wrote most of the songs, as well as Winger's keyboard player Paul Taylor. He's also on the album. And vocalist Brian Camboa. He also sings leads on a couple songs. Mick released the first single, Loyal to the Lie, and the song is heavier than Croo. It's got a driving energy, and it's pretty cool. Looking forward to seeing the release. Now, if you haven't heard this song, you can check it out on YouTube or on Spotify. Let me know what you think. Hey, Steve from the future here. Just to let you know, Mick just dropped his latest single from the album, Undone. Dropped it on January 25th, 2024. You can see the video on YouTube or check it out on Spotify. Pretty cool song. Mick Mars has had a long, bumpy ride to get to where he's at, but no matter what happened, his toes kept on tapping. From poverty to illness, he keeps moving forward despite what obstacles have been thrown in front of him. His name will always be synonymous with Motley Crue, no matter how things end up. And at 72, he may not be touring anymore, but he still has a lot of music in him. I'm looking forward to seeing what else he does. Well, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. If you did, do me a favor, hit the like button. And if you like content like this, consider subscribing. If there's somebody you'd like me to check out, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to do it for you. Until next time, no matter what they say, don't forget, rock's not dead. Take care.